Welcome to Reconnect, the podcast dedicated to sharing and defending the good news of Jesus Christ. The word religion comes from two root words, re, again, and lig, connect. Together, religion means reconnect. The Bible reveals that it is through Jesus Christ alone that we are reconnected into a right relationship with God. Reconnect us, O Lord. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Reconnect. My name is Andy Rasman. It's spelled W-R-A-S-M-A-N. This episode's guest is Ken Chitwood, and we will discuss sharing the gospel of Jesus Christ with adherents of other religions through a process Ken calls building bridges. I learned about this process from an article he wrote for the November 2014 issue of Missio Apostolica Lutheran Mission Matters. Ken's building bridges method of interreligious dialogue offers 6 steps to better interaction with non-Christians, and I'm thankful that Ken has offered time for me to ask him some what I consider nuts and bolts questions for how to put these steps into practice. A link to this article is available at this episode's blog post at andyrasman.com. Ken and I both have BA and MA degrees from Concordia University, California. Ken earned an MA in Theology and Culture from there, and he is currently a PhD student and teaching assistant fellow at University of Florida, studying religion in the Americas and global Islam. You can access Ken's blog, Faith Goes Pop, at kenchitwood.com. That's CHITWOOD. And at that site, you can also access his speaking calendar to see if he's speaking in an area nearby you anytime coming up this year. And you can find links to Ken's many published works. He's been quite prolific over the last few years, writing in many different sources. So, Ken, welcome to Reconnect.
Thanks, Andy. It's a real pleasure to be on here and to talk through the encounter with other religions, and thanks for the shout-out to the blog there. I hope people are able to find some good resources there at kenchitwood.com. I appreciate you mentioning that.
Yeah, and listeners, if you haven't caught on yet, because I know this is very early in the podcast, I do 2 segments. Both segments are roughly 20 to 30 minutes long, and the idea there is for you to be able to listen on your way to work, stop in the middle, and pick back up. And then I love to be able to share ministries this way as well by, as Ken said, being able to share websites that I look at and find helpful from time to time. So, Ken, this article you wrote has a very long title. Actually, I guess the title is short. It's Building Bridges, but the subtitle is very long. The subtitle for Building Bridges is Toward Constructing a Christian Foundation for Interreligious Relationships in the Shift from Religious Privilege to Spiritual Plurality. And so because that's quite long, I thought we could just start by breaking down the title. The key words that jumped out to me were religious privilege and spiritual plurality, since that's what we should be shifting from and toward. So do you mind just explaining what those terms mean for us to start with?
Right, yeah. So this was given to me by Missio Apostolica. They asked me to write this article for them, and they were talking about the kind of shift that is going on here in the 20th and 21st centuries, and there's various shifts that are happening in the world around us. And I can't remember the name of the author off the top of my head, but there was an author that they referenced that talked about these various shifts that are happening. I think it might be, Stuart Murray Williams is the name of the British theologian who talks about the movement of mission. In fact, that mission itself has moved from the center to the margin, from the majority to the minority, from settlers to sojourners, from control to witness, from institution to movement, from maintenance to mission, and from privilege to plurality. And that's the one they asked me to pick up on. So you can hear in each one of these is the idea that, in fact, I like that first one, from the center to the margin. Is kind of the one I think that runs through each of them. Is no longer is Christianity the core cultural construct. Instead, it's at the margin, along with a lot of other religions. Gone is the center of social and cultural production. that perhaps Christianity fulfilled for hundreds, if not thousands of years in European and North American contexts, and also probably in other contexts as well through the colonial project. And so the idea with my article was to talk about the shift from religious privilege to spiritual plurality. And this idea is that, this idea of privilege, we hear this a lot, right? You're hearing this around the context and the conversations about, like Ferguson in Baltimore, and this discussion of Black Lives Matter and white privilege. And there's been debates between folks like Jon Stewart and Bill O'Reilly talking about, is there such a thing as white privilege? And so you could go, well, is there such a thing as religious privilege? I mean, come on, Ken, are you just coming up with something fancy here? And no, I don't think it's just something that we're making up. But religious privilege is often something that we're not aware of. Likewise, spiritual plurality can be something we're not aware of. But religious privileges are the ways in which not only in our culture, but in multiple cultures or communities or countries, where society accommodates that religious perspective. It's about the advantages you have that you think are normal. Like, this is just the way it is.
Right.
And then others being the deviation from normal. It's about fate or a culture kind of dealing you from the bottom of the deck so that you can play the game better.
Right.
And it's conferred to groups, not necessarily individuals. So you may be an individual and not feel privileged, but your group is generally privileged. And there's no hard lines either. I mean, there's some blurriness. So to get concrete about this, the idea is that Christianity used to have a privileged position in our society, that it had certain advantages for you to be Christian. Right. And Christianity could do things that perhaps other religious institutions, organizations, or individuals could not do. And we were just assumed that, Christianity or the Judeo-Christian perspective was normal. And everything outside of the Judeo-Christian perspective was not normal or other.
Right.
And that's shifting and that's changing, and you can feel it.
Mm-hmm.
You can hear it on Facebook wall posts. Back in my day, any paragraph that starts with when I was younger, or back, in the 1950s. Everyone loves the 1950s if you're Christian, right? Because then it was normal to be Christian.
Right.
Certainly there was religious diversity back then, but we had this idea of the Judeo-Christian American culture. Eisenhower talked about this when he was president, and we just kind of assumed that's how it is. And now that's not necessarily the case. We accommodate multiculturalism, and multiculturalism has its own problems. But the idea is that we live among a plurality of religions, and each of them should have a place at the table. Each of them should have equal advantage when it comes to culture, or equal disadvantage when it comes to culture. Right. Rather than one having privilege. So I've talked enough on that. Give me something else on that, or ask me a question.
Okay, good. So religious privilege, you have certain rights as a Christian is what I'm hearing. And now because that religious privilege has been lost because of this fact of religious pluralism, I like how in the article you mentioned that there's a fact of religious pluralism. Certainly there are many religions here, and now that privilege we used to have has gone to the side. And your article is saying that in light of this shift, that we no longer have this special place of privilege as Christians, we need to pick up a different approach to interreligious dialogue.
Right.
And so how will the interreligious dialogue be different with this shift in perspective to approaching the religious other? How should it be different now that we're no longer in this place of religious privilege?
Yeah, so when we were in a place of religious privilege, there were certain ways that we could act towards someone from a different religious perspective. I use the terminology the religious other. I often use it with quotation marks. I'm doing air quotes over here, but you can't see them because this is a podcast. So, but I mean, the religious other is a concept that doesn't have much weight anymore in our culture. And I don't like using it because I think that's one of the shifts, is that we have moved from the center to the margins ourselves. We've moved from privilege to plurality, so we're one of many religions. And so I like to use a different religion, perhaps, rather than the religious other, because that's a way of marginalizing people, and I like to stay away from that. But when we move from privilege to plurality, it means that we have to change our tack. We have to change the way and the means by which we interact with people from different religious perspectives, because we are no longer able to exert control over society. And so therefore, if we were to offend or if we were to marginalize someone from a different religious perspective, we could always fall back on us controlling society, us exerting unequal advantages in society. We can no longer rely on that. We're just one of many religions these days. We're one of many perspectives that people can access either next door or on, the interwebs. Mm-hmm. It's all available to us. And so we can only exercise influence through, kind of giving testimony to our story and its implications. And that's working within a spiritually plural environment in a way that brings about more peace and less conflict, which still allows us to proclaim our message,
okay,
but not in a controlling way, not from a position of the majority or from the center or from institution, but one that's more narrative focused, one that's more focused on mission as translation, which we can talk about that later,
okay,
and one that's more focused on kind of movement, moving out rather than expecting people to come to us.
Gotcha.
And so I think that whole center to margins thing really helps you. As you're on the margins now, you act different when you come as an outsider
mm-hmm.
than an insider. And so basically Christianity has to get used to acting like an outsider, no matter the context. Because whether it's the United States or whether it's Guatemala or whether it's Kenya, whether you've got the majority of the population is Christian or not, you are still an outsider because of the movements of media across the world and migration across the world. We're no longer a majority. We're one of many minorities.
Right. And theologically, from what has been revealed to us in Scripture, churches, ecclesia, so we're the cast out ones. We're already, as that famous bumper sticker, it's floating all around, we're not of this world. We're already the outsider in that sense. Would you agree?
Yeah, and that goes back to one of those concepts that the British theologian Stuart Murray Williams was using, from settler to sojourner. So we're not people who come and need to build a community in a city and an institution or a nation or a global government or whatever on earth. We don't need that. We are aliens and exiles and pilgrims in this world, right?
Yeah.
And our Paul uses a language in Philippians that we are citizens of heaven. We have the rights and the privileges of heaven and the kingdom of heaven.
Right.
We may not have the rights and privileges of societies and nations on earth.
Right.
But we do have the privilege of the kingdom of heaven.
Right.
We're sons and daughters of the King.
Yeah, and we're not building the kingdom here because Jesus' kingdom is not of this world. So as vagabonds of this world, this is why I wanted you on the show right now, is because your article gives 6 suggestions or a 6-step process for better engagement in this shift. And they are to pay attention, to find informed friendships, to shut up and learn, to dine, dialogue, and do together, to discern, and witness to the worldview. And so I want to just go through each of these 6 briefly with you. This episode, this segment, maybe we can get through the first 2, maybe 3, and then we'll wrap up on the end. And so I really hope this is what listeners will walk away with, is some points that they can take from this and apply to their interreligious dialogue. And so the first one you suggested was pay attention. And so what are we to pay attention to and why?
Yeah, so one of the things that I kind of riff on regularly is this idea that we are, as I'm speaking to the U.S. context really here, we are religiously illiterate. This is the pickup on language used by Dr. Stephen Prothero from Boston University, who wrote a book called Religious Literacy. And he found, and he teamed up with the Pew Research Center and found that across the board, people in the U.S. fail even a basic quiz on world religion.
Mm-hmm.
We fail 50 percentile mark. That is not a passing grade. Even the best grades among people who are non-religious or atheist, and those who are Mormon or Jewish, those are like the top three. They scored at best 59%. So even if I were to round up, so I teach class and I TA for classes down here in Florida, and at the end of the semester, students are always asking, "Can you round me up to the next grade?"
Yep.
Even if we rounded these people up to 60%, they're still below the passing mark. In my classes, 62% is a passing grade. And so we don't pass. We fail these tests regularly. And one of the first ways we fail this test is just being aware of the fact that we live in a plural world, that we live in a context where we have a Hindu coworker and a Mormon neighbor, and we have an atheist nephew. And so we're not aware of it. And maybe we're aware of it. Maybe we understand that they're that, but we don't really lean into. We don't have a posture where we really try to pay attention to what that means. We hear that our nephew is now an atheist, or we know that we have a Hindu coworker, or our neighbors are Mormon. And what we do is we just slide those into these mental drawers that we have, or shelves, and we're like, well, I know what it is to be a Mormon. I've seen the show Big Love. I got that. Atheist, yeah, I mean, they're, all, like, there's basically a Satanist, or it's like Richard Dawkins, yeah, I got that. Hindu, yeah, they got the elephant god, and the god with a lot of hands, and there's like 1,000 gods. So I know who these people are.
Yeah.
And so the first step is to just kind of forget those preconceived categories that you have that you've picked up from pop culture, or maybe your social studies class in the 7th grade, or some TV show, or whatever it may be, and to lean into this and try to really understand what it means. So some people just need to understand that their next door neighbors are Mormon. Maybe they don't know that. Maybe you need to pay attention to the demographics of your community. Maybe you'd be surprised to find out that you've got a significant Hindu community in your neighborhood. Or maybe there's a large number of Muslims that have moved in due to immigration.
Yeah,
patterns.
Which is something you wrote about on this one. I like how you're pointing out, pay attention to the people that are in your life, but then if we're thinking as a local congregation, who's in our community, within our church congregation, and you mentioned mapping religious institutions in your area, and that was something that was thrown out there. I thought that sounded like a good idea. I was hoping you could walk us through what that process is. Like, what does that mean, and what would we then respond with if we find something like you said, like there's a large Hindu community in our area?
Yeah, that's a really simple way. So Google is just great to be able to do things like this. Like, if you were curious, you could go on to maps.google.com, and I do this all the time. Whenever I go to a new area or move into a new area, I'm looking for some place to go. So I'm looking at Gainesville right now on my computer. I'm going to pop in Buddhist temple just to see if there's any around here. Boom, I just found Anand Buddhist temple. Okay, and I've not seen this yet. I'm actually looking at where it is, and I'm like, I've driven past it, but I've not gone there. But now I know where it is. Maybe I want to find, mosque. So I'm going to pop in mosque, and I pop this in there. I find, two Islamic centers, the Islamic Center of Gainesville and Hoda Center. And I also find Dove World Outreach Center, which is funny because that's the Burn a Quran guy, Terry Jones. That pops up on Google. And so now I've seen there's conflict maybe about Islam in my community. And already just looking at my map on Google, I'm able to see, two mosques, an Islamic student organization on campus. I found that one Buddhist temple, and actually found another Tibetan Buddhist temple a little further out. And I was surprised about the Tibetan Buddhist temple. I had not seen that yet.
Yeah.
I'm starting to see new things. And the next step after that would be to go for a visit, especially mosques. Oh my gosh, they love having people come for a visit. If grab a group of people who are interested, contact the mosque, give them an email or a call. They'll touch base with you. They'll set up a time for you to come. They'll usually put on a great meal for you. And at the Hindu temple, same thing. They'll invite you over, and you can go learn. And you can step on to the next step in the process.
Yeah.
Where you start to connect with people, and you listen and learn to them. And just leaning into, the people that are around you. So before you can really before you can really love your neighborhood or heart your hood, you have to know your hood.
Right.
You have to understand who's in your neighborhood.
Yeah.
That's the first step. And then you move on to building friendships and listening and learning and so on and so forth from there. So that's the first step, is just being aware.
Good. All right. So I like how you're calling us to not just find out that there is a mosque potentially in our neighborhood, but to actually go to that mosque, which could be a scary prospect for some people. But I like how you share that this really isn't, that they're very open and accepting. I know it's probably like us. If someone called one of our churches and said, "Hey, I'm a Muslim. I'd like to just, meet the pastor and get a tour of your church and know what you believe and what you do." And most churches, I think, would be pretty open to that. And so it's really the same for them. And so I think that really takes a lot of the burden off. And so from there, once you know what's there, you said you move into actually forming a friendship there. And so is this friendship evangelism that you're promoting? Because I know that's nothing new that I'm aware of, at least. It's not new, this idea. You just witness through friendship. So are you bringing anything different or new to the table with the suggestion of forming friendships?
Yeah, this isn't friendship evangelism. I'm glad you brought that up. This is just friendship. This is the lost art of being a friend with someone.
Gotcha.
And not using that friendship as a means to an end, but as an end unto itself.
Mm-hmm.
So my aim in interacting with people with different religious perspectives is not with this immediate posture of converting them. That is such a transactional movement. It's like, I've got a product, I'm going to build a relationship with you so I can sell you that product, like I'm a bad car salesman,
Mm-hmm.
This is just to kind of build bridges, to build connection points between us and someone from a different religion, for our sake and for their sake.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a transformational step. This is something that can really change the world. And it's so vitally important. I mean, gosh, I can just think of the pick on the obvious one is when we're seeing on the TV all these images of ISIS, Al-Dawla Islamiyah in Syria and Iraq, and we're seeing the conflict that is there with this Muhammad art cartoon events in Texas and two kind of Lone Ranger terrorist guys who get shot and all that. Oh gosh, it's so transformational for you to just go and share a meal with a Muslim friend, and just flips the script for them, for you, for people around you when you hear that just happened. Like, they're like, what? Like, I didn't know you could be friends with Muslims. Like, are you kidding? Like, did they make you eat something weird? And it's like, no, actually, I just ate this really delicious, like, pita pocket beef thing. It was really good. I actually just came from right before we're getting on this podcast. I was eating a meal with a guy we'll call Ahmed. He made me dinner. He's a Sunni Muslim. And then he made me dessert. Oh, my gosh, it was so good. Muslims are, like, the most hospitable people in the world. Right. And they always make amazing food. And they're so willing and open because they're so marginalized and they're so ostracized in the United States that for you to just go and share a meal with them can just be this mind-blowing, wonderful thing. And it's also good for us. A guy named John Hucken, he's a peacemaker out of San Diego, California. And he talked about how friendships with someone from another religion can be a cure for fear, can expand our worldviews, can be an antidote to isolationism, where we kind of just hone off into our own social, cultural, religious groups. It can meet the need for mutual relationship in a world that is so much defined by superficial relationships. And it also can give us an understanding of misrepresentation of these people in the media or in books that we've read. It can really challenge a lot of our preconceptions about ourselves and about others.
Right, which is
That's the aim here.
Which is really good, because everything you just shared, even like, so you're friends with someone who could be a Muslim, since maybe the example you just gave. But so the goal is to be a friend, just because you're friends. We all have friends. We all desire friends, and it's a calling that we have in this life, to be a friend to someone. And friendship evangelism, from what I was hearing you say, isn't even really being a friend. And so you're advocating just be a friend. And what I find so awesome with what I just heard you saying is that then later, the evangelism may come with another Muslim who I'm not even friends with. It could just come up. And because I actually have a friend who's a Muslim, the evangelism that I have with that person will even be better, because of the time taken here just to pay attention and to form friendships. Ken, we'll go ahead and close on this segment and pick up in more details with the other steps that you suggest, because I think probably next segments where we're really going to get into some stuff where we're putting this into practice and hopefully being able to get a lot of good opportunities to dialogue with people and get to share Christ. And so, listeners, please go ahead and log on to Ken's website, kenchitwood.com, and check this out so you can see who you're listening to. And whenever you get back from work, we'll pick up this conversation and just see where we go with this.
Many different people have many different opinions about the person and work of Jesus Christ. Latter-day Saints, or Mormons, believe Jesus is our spirit brother, along with Lucifer. Jehovah's Witnesses believe Jesus is actually Michael the Archangel. Muslims believe Jesus was the precursor prophet to Muhammad. Scientologists believe that Jesus was a tool for mind corruption. But what should you believe about Jesus? Better yet, how do you talk about him among these other views? Robot Jesus and Three Other Jesuses You Never Knew is a book authored by me, Kyle Bashirs, that explores how Jesus is viewed within Mormonism, Jehovah's Witness, Islam, and Scientology for the purpose of aiding fruitful dialogue about the gospel. It's available now on Amazon in paperback and Kindle editions. Check out dearephesus.org for a free chapter. That's dearephesus.org, and just click on the resource tab. There are many different Jesuses in the world. Are you prepared to give an account for the Savior Jesus?
To financially support Reconnect, visit contradictmovement.org and order your copy of Contradict, They Can't All Be True. Contradict stickers and tracts are also available. Again, that's contradictmovement.org.
All right, welcome back. Still got Ken with me on the phone line. Ken is calling from Florida, Gainesville, I hear him saying. And Ken, you're a pastor now in Florida too, right? In addition to being a student and teacher at the University of Florida, right?
Yeah, so a lot of people call this like work or priest or bivocational. So I earn my bread and butter from my work with the university. And then I serve a Lutheran congregation just half a mile north of the campus. I help out with preaching and some of our digital technology stuff, social media and all that, and just generally serve in both capacities. I see them both as callings and love doing both at the same time.
Good. And so, listeners, if you want to follow Ken, you can go to his website, kenchitwood.com, and from there you can find links to his Twitter page, Facebook page, his blog, and a slew of other publications that he's been a part of. And the one we're looking at right now is an article he wrote called Building Bridges, which came out last year in Missio Apostolica. It's a production that's a biannual printing of the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod on missions. So we're going to keep digging in on this. And we left off in the last segment talking about this building bridges process. And the first step was to just pay attention, know who the religious adherents are in your life, in your neighborhood, in your city. And then from there, actually find them and form friendships. And from there, Ken suggests that we listen and learn. And so what are you advocating for with this suggestion, Ken?
Yeah, so when people ask me like what the most important step in witnessing to people of other religions is, I often reply, shutting our mouths. And I let that sit there for a second because people look at me and they're like, wait a second, you're a pastor. You're not supposed to say things like that. Or they look at you and like, well, that's not very effective, is it? And so while it's a little crass and potentially a little upsetting, I frame my response with this kind of disquieting language to prove a point. That, as I mentioned in the first segment, that we are in the U.S. suffering from a case of multi-generational, multinational, and multicultural religious ignorance. We just don't understand other religions. And so the first step in wanting to connect with people from other religions or to witness to people from other religions is to listen to them longer than feels comfortable.
Ooh. Okay.
And so you're going to want to open your mouth. They're going to say something, and it's just going to kick off like your, apologetic jujitsu button somewhere. And so you're just going to like kick back and just be like, well, that's not true. No. And this is particularly going to happen when they say, well, Christians are blank, or, well, in the Bible it says this, right? And if they ask a question, you can correct, but keep it quick, keep it simple. You're there to learn. You're there to listen and to understand their perspective, not to correct them, not to tell them they're wrong, not to go immediately into a defense of the Christian faith or an attack against their faith. And this also means that we're not just listening for the sake of speaking or just politely waiting our turn. We're listening, pure and simple, just listening and learning.
Right, but how long should we listen before we share our own beliefs?
Yeah, and this is tied into this whole religious privilege idea that we talked about in the first segment. We must realize that our interjections about biblical positions are not just little pot shots at some intellectual idea, but it's the undermining of an entire plausibility structure and understanding the cosmos and worldview for this person. And so the second we just insert or thrust Bible verses or truth into the conversation, we think that we're just adding a little thing. But for them, it's a full frontal attack on the way they see the world, the way they view their relationship with you, the way they understand their family, the way that they do their work, the way that they think about death and life, and all of this. And so we should listen, like I said, longer than feels comfortable, to the point where they start asking questions. You listen long enough, people are going to go, I've been talking enough. Tell me about you. Tell me about what you thought about what I just said. Or they're going to invite the conversation. And in that way, it's not going to be seen as an attack.
Gotcha.
Because they've invited you.
Okay, so you're saying
you to share.
So you're saying just hold back. This isn't like I'm friends with the person for months before I share. You're talking about in the span of a conversation. Listen, and then they will ask. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, I mean, you've had friends before. I've had friends before. It's never one-sided if it's a friendship.
Yeah.
So you're going to have a conversation. I mentioned my friend Ahmed earlier. I was eating dinner with him earlier today. I listen and learn a lot from him about Islam. But I'm not in that relationship because I'm a student of Islam. I'm not in that relationship because I'm seeking just to witness to Ahmed. I'm his friend. But I hear a lot about his faith because we're friends, and it's a very important thing to him. I also, have him asking me questions about Christianity. Mm-hmm. He's like, well, you're doing this. What does that mean? Like when we were having Lent, I was saying, I can't get together on Wednesday night. I got these midweek services called Lent. He's like, what is that?
Open door.
Yeah. I mean, it's just natural. I mean, it's not like I didn't force that. I'm just going to explain it to him.
Yeah.
And I'm not like, okay, I'm not even treating it like if I don't nail it here, then I haven't witnessed to the gospel. I'm just going to tell him what Lent means.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to be like, well, don't you see what it means and how? No, I'm just going to tell him what it means. And it's up to the Holy Spirit to do the work in Ahmed's heart. I am not going to convert Ahmed. I'm going to tell him about who I am. I'm going to tell him about how I follow Jesus. I'm going to tell him what Lent means. I'm going to tell him all types of stuff about me because I'm a friend. And I'm going to share with him who I am.
Yeah.
If the Holy Spirit chooses to do something with that, fantastic. If the Holy Spirit doesn't do anything with that, it's not like I sever ties with Ahmed and head in a different direction. I'm still going to be friends with him. I'm still going to talk to him. He's still probably going to ask questions, and we're just going to continue on listening and learning from one another.
Yeah, and you've already shared you just had dinner with him today. I'm sure that wasn't your first dinner that you had with him. And from friendships, obviously, we converse, which involves listening as well as talking, and dining, which is your fourth step, to actually dine, dialogue, and do together. And so for the dining, tell us about the importance of having meals with people of other religions. Does that have a particular benefit for us, for them as well?
Yeah, I mean, I believe like meals are just these sacred events. Because meals are less about the food that we're eating than the food or the people that we're eating the food with. So meals are less about the food we're eating and more about the people we're eating the food with. They're very intimate spaces, and they provide these connections around a shared meal, particularly when you're sharing a plate. Like I said, when I'm eating with some friends who are Muslim, we'll sometimes share a plate, or we eat with our hands.
Right.
That's an intimate thing, right? They also provide impromptu opportunities for connection and engagement. They're also a fun way to learn. I love food. Like, who doesn't love food? And eating and exploring fun foods. I mean, if you're scared of food, maybe this isn't the best way going forward. But man, I mean, sitting down at a Hindu temple and eating stuff, or at a Sikh gurudwara and getting this wonderful honey dish that's just like, it's going to blow your mouth and mind apart. Like, it's so good. It's just a fun way to go about it too. So I think there's just a lot of neat opportunities that come out of eating a meal together that may not happen if it's like, well, let's get together for a conversation, or let's have a public dialogue.
Right.
Why not? Let's eat dinner together.
Yeah.
let's do that. That sounds a lot more fun.
Yeah. Well, what about the prayer at the meals? Because that's something I was curious about, because I know some Christians have the practice of always praying before they eat. Does that come up when you eat with someone of another religion, this moment of prayer time, like how you go about handling that?
Yeah, it has come up. Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes I just let the moment pass because I'm caught up in the meal. That happens if I'm eating with Christians or non-Christians. I'm a bad grace sayer. My wife catches me and she's like, "Hey, let's say grace." I'm like, "Oh yeah, let's say grace. It's a great idea." But I offered to pray before, and I've just been kind of generic. I say thank you, God, for the food before us. The friend beside us. This time together. Bless this food to our bodies, this time together to our souls. And that's even generic enough for an agnostic to be like, yeah, it's pretty cool. I like that prayer. In fact, I had a friend who is kind of like borderline atheist, and he says, I like that prayer, and I know who I'm directing it to, and hopefully it's a teachable moment. I've also had other friends pray for the meal. They've offered, and I've not turned them down. So I had a Muslim friend who prayed over a meal one time when we got together, and at a halal restaurant we were eating kebabs, and it was cool. I got to see he prayed with his hands open, and his eyes were open, and so I asked. I was like, "What? You had your eyes open and your hands are up." I was like, "Tell me what that meant, if you don't mind." And he did. He talked to me about how he was open. He had an open posture to God, to Allah, and that his eyes were open because he's like, I don't close my eyes when I'm talking to you, so I don't want to close my eyes when I'm talking to Allah either. And so this is a learning moment for me. So prayer comes up, and I was like, just try to keep it as keep the awkwardometer as low as possible.
Okay.
If it seems awkward that you're going to pray, then back off. If it seems cool that you can pray, then be generic.
Are you
again? I don't think the prayer is the opportunity that you have to have the kingdom come down to earth. I don't think that's the moment.
Right. Interesting. Thanks for sharing that and some tips on approaching that. Something else on this section on the dialogue, you were advocating that pastors don't teach within the church other religions because they likely won't do a good job. And you suggested instead it'd be better to invite a guest leader from that religion to come in and teach or have a public conversation with the leader of the church. But couldn't Christian teachers and pastors still give us the basic gist of a religion's beliefs and history and culture so that when an opportunity to dialogue does arise, we'll all be better equipped for the conversation? I mean, are you completely opposed to teaching religions?
More and more I am. And I've been a guy who's done this at every church I've worked at, and each time I've done it, I've just felt so woefully inadequate, and I'm feeling more and more inadequate for doing it. The more and more I become a quote unquote expert in this stuff, and that's because really I think Don has the idea that you can really boil down world religions to any particular essence or basics, and the simpler you try to be, the less accurate you are. And so even if someone has a lot of knowledge about the topic, and most pastors don't, most pastors are woefully inadequately equipped for this. They're not ready to teach a 4-week or 6-week or 8-week or 10-week study on world religions. I have counseled many different pastors on this stuff, and several of them have decided just not to do it at the end because they're like, this stuff is too big. I can't get it all. And I think that's okay. But then I tell them, bring in someone from that perspective and just do an interview with them. Ask the questions you want to ask. And this does two things. One, you're going to hear it from, quote unquote, the horse's mouth. And then two, you're going to be able to do that find informed friendships bit. Maybe you can even do it around a meal. And you're going to have an embodied presence of the other religion. And that's going to break down all types of barriers. That's going to distill a lot of worries that people have. And so I think it's a better move to have a dialogue event rather than to have like a world religions Bible study. The other thing too is in those world religion Bible studies, I've sat in on a lot of them, pastors often offer up a straw man of the other religion. So they teach the way of the religion, Islam or Hinduism or, Sikhism, and they offer up a version that can easily be knocked down by apologetics. And I'm like, well, that didn't even represent Sikhism very well. And so even if your goal is to go and evangelize someone else, you're going with the straw man version of their faith, and you're going to get your butt kicked because you don't even know. You don't even know what their faith is. And you think you're witnessing to that faith. You're not.
Yeah.
You're witnessing to that guy's or that gal's misrepresentation of that faith.
Yeah. Well, what about just teaching the basics? Yeah. What about just the basics? For like,
I don't know what the basics mean. I think if the basics meant
who the founder is, what they believe, what they taught, how the religion spread, what the basic. I mean, teach the 5 pillars of Islam. I mean, we can do that, right? I mean, would that not be good?
Well, no. So the 5 pillars of Islam are not universally accepted among different Muslim bodies. They're going to be interpreted differently, vastly differently, among different bodies. And so, like for the Nation of Islam here in the United States, if you live in New York, you're bound to run into a Muslim who's part of the Nation of Islam, or maybe even part of the 5% Nation, which is a breakoff group. They don't teach the same 5 pillars of Islam. You may have different interpretations of the 5 pillars of Islam, even within the different Sunni schools.
Of course.
Or definitely between Sunni and Shi'i. And then you've got Sufi interpretations and the various different amirs and aliyahs of Sufism. And so you've got all these different interpretations. And so to teach the 5 pillars really isn't to teach any quote-unquote basics. What I think the basics should be is teaching people the basics of how to study religion.
Okay.
So instead of trying to teach people the basics of each individual religion, is equip people with the tools to start their own study. And maybe bringing them through this process is a way to do that. Equipping them to go and learn on their own, pointing out resources,
the right questions to ask.
The questions to ask, or there's a book out there called How to Be a Perfect Stranger, which is all about if you go visit a particular temple or church or synagogue, how do you enter into that space without being offensive?
Yeah.
Those are the things we could teach.
Which I guess to me is the basics, because you kind of have to know some of the basic beliefs so that you don't offend, and as well to recognize, like, what is another religion, So, I don't know. I guess that was one thing I saw. I was just wanting to question you about, because I don't know. I still think to counter what you're saying is the religious illiteracy. We need to know, this is an Om symbol. It's linked to Hinduism. This is what Om represents, because a lot of Christians I've seen, have symbols like that on their clothing, and they're unaware of what it is.
Yeah, and I try to do that. Someone texted me the other day and asked me about the Ahamsa, which is like this hand that wards against the evil eye in many different countries in the Levant, whether it be Turkey or Israel and all this stuff. And I explained that here are 7 different interpretations of that symbol from a Christian, Jewish, and Muslim perspective.
Yeah.
And even then, I said, here's a link to go learn more.
Right.
And we can do that, but the problem is, I don't think that is as helpful as equipping people to do their own study.
Right.
And equipping people to go off, because oftentimes if we just teach the basics, we teach the 5 pillars, or we teach, the Om symbol, or the Om symbol represents different things to different people.
Mm-hmm.
There's different schools of Hinduism. And so it's hard to boil down any particular religion to its basics without misrepresenting it. And so I think we'd rather do better to focus on equipping people to study religion rather than teaching them the basics. Now, we could use different religions as case studies in that.
Mm-hmm.
But, yeah, it's hard. I mean, I think a lot of churches just really don't do it very well.
Right.
And so that just worries me that's the religious education we're giving people. And obviously it's not working because there are plenty of churches who do these courses, and these same people at the end of that will fail even a basic religious literacy.
Right. And then if we actually do what you're suggesting, bring in someone of that religion, obviously what they're going to present isn't going to accurately represent all the different branches as well.
We shouldn't ask them to, no.
Yeah, so it's more of who's in our local community? Let's just see the process of how we can learn from another religious adherent, another religious leader in the community, and then from there, hopefully get that dialogue going where we can present the gospel.
That initial dialogue by bringing someone in is more about experiential learning rather than it is getting head knowledge about the actual religion. And we shouldn't ask them to represent their entire faith. That's unfair. That's crazy. It's like asking me to be like, tell me about Christianity. I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm just a Lutheran. Like, give me a break.
Yeah. Which should help break down what you were saying as the fear factor earlier in the last segment. Mm-hmm. This idea of being afraid, like, oh, this looks religious. I don't even know how to begin this conversation, how to even spark a dialogue with this person, even if I do desire to share the gospel with them. And so let's skip over the 5th one, which was discern. I think that is one that, just check what you're hearing with what's in Scripture. And the 6th one is one I find really appealing, and that's witness to the worldview. And this one might be the most difficult suggestion you give, because my understanding of it, it's to share the gospel within the worldview of the one to whom you are witnessing. And so can you explain this in more detail, maybe giving an example or two of how you would actually witness to the worldview?
Yeah, so I really rely on Lemon Santa, who talks about the gospel as translation.
Mm-hmm.
That in terms of Christian mission and witness, we commit ourselves to the bold and radical step of communicating the gospel in translation. So from the very beginning, we've tried to contextualize the gospel linguistically, theoretically, materially, ritualistically. You see this Paul, different terms for the church and his different analogies for the church, where he's talking about it as a body or as a building. Using the term ecclesia, you mentioned in the first segment. He was trying to communicate these different word pictures of what the church is to the cultures he was communicating with. Mm-hmm. Now, some people might think, well, that misrepresents maybe what the church is, and trying to change your analogy each time you present it to a different culture. But that's what Christianity is about, is committing to that bold, radical step of translating the gospel into the language of the people you're communicating it to. So it's saying that the salvific promise will communicate in the culture of those people. Yeah. And so if looking at someone who's, say they're Wiccan, we're going to commit to the bold, radical step that something about Wiccanism, that's not really a term, but something about Wicca, something about neo-paganism, or traditional classical paganism, is a fertile soil for the gospel. And in fact, there's even something within neo-paganism, let's use that term, that the gospel will be communicated most clearly through. That takes a deep and intimate knowledge of neo-paganism to know how to translate. Or it may just be casting the gospel out there, and the Wiccan or the neo-pagan being like, that's like this. And then dialoguing off of that, being like, well, tell me more about that. One of the ways that this is done well is by Carl Medeiros, talks about Muslims, Christians, and Jesus, which is a great resource. He's just like, we share Isa or Jesus in common. So why not talk about Jesus? Focus less on ISIS and just talk about Jesus.
Right, because that's the message that saves.
Right.
Not showing that Islam is incorrect.
Right, and I mean, that's like the easy one, right? I mean, it's like we're looking for something within Islam to communicate the gospel. I wonder what it might be. And there's this guy named Jesus who they talk about
as a prophet,
who they've got some serious, beliefs about, who they respect in so many ways. Why not start with him? Why not talk about him? Why not talk about the stories about his life? That's an easy place to start, and you'll learn, you'll grow, you'll be changed through the process. You'll be able to listen and learn through this, but you also get this kind of I use the terminology redemptive analogy, but that's someone's like trademark term, and there's some problems with the book Eternity in Their Hearts that writes on this. I've got some issues about the way religions and cultures are essentialized in that.
Yeah. Universalism maybe comes up. I haven't read that book, but is that where it leads to?
It doesn't lead to universalism,
okay.
But I think what happens is in the excitement to witness to the worldview, we find something that we think is a perfect analogy in this culture or in this religion, and we're like, that's like the gospel. And so what we do is we collapse that entire concept in that culture or that religion into the gospel. And the person may very quickly go, well, you didn't understand that concept in the first place.
Yeah.
And I think in Eternity in Their Hearts, I think the concepts are collapsed.
Gotcha.
Because there's too much excitement. I think his first example about the people in Papua New Guinea is great, but then all the other ones he uses, I think he's just moving too quickly.
Yeah,
so
forcing
we need
something
patience
there.
here.
Yeah,
don't force it. Don't force it. That's the important thing here is witness to the worldview, and that's why discernment is important, because you'll need to know when it's appropriate to connect to these ideas and these metaphors and these analogies to share the narrative of the gospel.
Wow, amazing stuff. Definitely you've left us with some good points to work with and to try to put into practice. So listeners, if you follow through on any of the stuff you've heard Ken mentioned today, like looking up a local Buddhist temple or a mosque and actually calling them, connecting with them, meeting with them, I'd love to hear your experience. If you are a pastor listening or a teacher, you're like, maybe I should call in a person of this other religion and have them teach, have me do a dialogue with them for everyone to be a part of. If you follow through on this, please send me an email at andy@contradictmovement.org. Even contact Ken. Let him know about your experiences. We'd love to hear these and to be able to continue to share them as an encouragement to others to see how this is working, because I did notice in Ken's article, if you go to my site, andyrasman.com, I will have a link on this episode to that article. If you go and read that, he does say in there that this is a work in process. Is that correct, Ken? This is more of an idea and that it's not written in stone. This could change and move to something else being the better model. Is that correct?
Yeah, I'm building a lot of this off of my own experiences of the last 11 years or so engaging in these and conversations I've had with other people, but I'm always willing to invite more dialogue. If you go to my website, get on the contact page, send me an email, send me a knock-knock joke, just say knock-knock, I'll start talking to you. It's just a great way to build a dialogue because I want people to engage with me and teach me as well. I need to listen and learn still, so please contact me.
Okay, Ken, so do you still have like 5-10 minutes? I know we're getting past. Yeah. Okay, so I just want to wrap up with a couple. These maybe would be more argumentative questions, things that I struggled with reading your article. I'm curious maybe more you to critique what I have been doing based on what I read from your article. So For example, you indicated that we should avoid aggressive engagement or combative apologetics. And I'm not sure exactly what you mean by those terms, but would my approach with contradict fall into these categories? And I think maybe people listening to this know my approach, but I'll just briefly share it. Setting up in a public space a table with a poster, which is obviously of a religious message, provocative enough that people will come and approach me and say, what do you mean by this? And then just kind of starting straight from it, hey, this sign says contradict, spelled with religious symbols. Religions contradict each other. They can't all be true. Which is true, if any? I, for one, am a Christian and believe Jesus died for all your sins, and I'm here to discuss with anyone what that means or what they believe. Would that fit into aggressive engagement or combative apologetics, in your opinion, Ken, and maybe be something you're not recommending?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm all for different gifts, different people. So part of this has to be understood that that's not going to be my style. So your style is your style, and it may very well work for you. That's not my style. So that part of it just comes from a personal bias and a personal approach.
Right.
But then it also connects back with this whole idea of the shift from privilege to plurality.
Yeah.
I think there is a very strong possibility, and I've not been there at the tables with you, and I know you've talked through your approach with me before, and honestly, it softened some of the edges I thought were there as we talked about it personally before. I think we stand to lose more than we stand to gain if we start off with a kind of adding fuel to the fire type of approach, where we kind of immediately back the animal into a corner by inviting an argument and inviting a contestation that could be just taken as arrogance. Mm-hmm. And maybe I'm less concerned with the people who are stepping up to the table than with the many who are not.
Right.
Those are the people that I'm more concerned with. If they're stepping up to the table, then that's obviously speaking to them.
Right.
And good things may come. Gosh, I mean, I've had friendships start with arguments. So that's fine. But I'm worried about the people who don't come to the table. Most
people don't know I'm a Christian, so it's pretty good because with the poster I just says contradict, and they don't know I'm a Christian. So really they wouldn't probably know what I believe or don't know unless they do talk to me. So that may make it even more of maybe not going against what you're kind of advocating or saying could be the problem. What you just said there, the fear of coming across as arrogant. Within your article, you had a quote there. It said, "The confident announcement of the Christian faith sounds like an arrogant attempt of some people to impose their values on others." And you also quoted Timothy Keller, is quoting a young New Yorker as having told him, "It's arrogant to say your religion is superior and try to convert everyone else to it." What if the Christian faith is proclaimed as truth on the grounds of the resurrection of Christ? Would it still be arrogant at this point? And is it really saying we're superior, or is it just saying that Christ is superior and that we're pointing to a message which is true?
Right, and I think it is important to talk about the aspects of starting points. And I guess my starting point is to cast the resurrection in the context of the death of Christ and his incarnation as a human who could die, and the incarnation then cast within creation, which we all have in common, and the restoration of that creation.
Yeah.
And so for me, then that changes the approach for me a little bit. So I'm coming at it as, let's talk about the story we have in common. Let's start there. And so, like the contradict sticker makes it difficult for me to go about it that way. Okay. And so, because immediately I'm saying there's something different about us, rather than saying what's the same here. What do we have in common? And talking about how we've been created in the image of God, that there's some divine spark within us. Or perhaps with someone who's atheist, it's going to be different. There's going to be a different tack that's going to need to be taken. And one of my overall things, too, is people who engage, I'm not saying you do this, but I'm saying people engage in apologetics as such or polemics as such, they start off with a goal of conversion.
Mm-hmm.
For me, I take Jesus' words about seek first his kingdom, and I apply that to evangelism too. I'm not seeking first conversion. I'm seeking first his kingdom. And his kingdom reorients all that I do. My friendships, the way I listen, the way I talk, the way I share meals, in the context of a friendship and deep relationship. And so my proclamation of the gospel, which could be extremely simple or even an offhanded comment, it has to be personal and touching. It's a natural outflow of the relationship rather than the purpose of it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how I interpret seeking first his kingdom. Is I look at what his kingdom is like in the life and the ministry and the death and resurrection of Christ, and this reconciliation of the unity of humanity and of God with humanity. And I see, how can I live that out? How can I mirror that in my relationship with a Muslim? I want to flip the script from I'm friends with a Muslim even though I'm a Christian to I'm friends with a Muslim because I'm a Christian.
Right.
And for me, then, I'm going to approach this from a dialogue, a what we have in common, rather than a, hey, different, hey, truths are not the same, hey, contradict.
Yeah.
But that's very much my approach, and that's my tack. I leave room for the Holy Spirit to work in whichever way it wants to, too. I mean, I'm not here to say, this Andy Raskin guy, he's worthless. It's different. It's not my approach, and I think we need more room for approaches that take this kingdom orientation to heart. And we've done a lot of apologetics. We've done a lot of nifty, clever ways of going about that.
Yeah.
Maybe we need something else now.
Yeah, for sure.
In addition to.
Definitely. Well, thanks, Ken, for taking the time to be here. And listeners, you can find out a lot more about Ken and what he's working on at Ken Chitwood at CHITWOOD.com. And Ken, we have a book coming out from you soon too, right? That people can buy?
Soon is a relative term.
It's like a year out?
Yeah. Faith Goes Pop should be coming out next spring.
Okay.
2016.
Okay.
It'll be focused on the intersection between religion and pop culture, which you can find out more about on my blog.
All right. Which is the name of his blog, too, Faith Goes Pop, accessed from kenchitwood.com. All right, Ken, thanks so much. And listeners, please contact Ken, contact me, and let us know, what you gained from this. And please, if you felt that what Ken shared was helpful, if it was challenging to you, consider sharing it with others who also could be encouraged or challenged by his message today. All right, thanks, Ken, and God bless you all.
Your mission, if you choose to accept it, share this episode on all of your social media sites and with your email contacts, people who will benefit from listening to the show. Thank you for listening. Reconnect us, O Lord.